Hello everyone, welcome to the first video in the series Develop Offline Ludo Game with React Native Basics. So let's talk about the prerequisites of this course. I'm assuming that you have programming knowledge with some coding experience in JavaScript. If you don't have JavaScript experience, I strongly recommend that you get some coding experience in JavaScript and then continue with this course. Now let's talk about the basics of React Native. When you create a new project through the command React Native init, this is the project that gets created. And when you install the initial project through the command React Native run Android for Android or React Native run iOS for iOS, this is the app that gets launched on the device of your choice. The index.js is the entry file of your application. And here you register the root component of your app, which is the app. In this case, it is being imported from the app.js. So let's talk about the basics of React Native that we will be using to create the Ludo game, that is components, states, props, and some basics of styling. Starting with the component. So component is the basic building blocks of React Native framework. So everything that you see on the screen is made up of components. A component can be all of your screen, such as in this case, the app is your component. Or a component can be a part of a screen, such as the header in this screen that says Welcome to React. So there are two types of components. One is the class-based components, and the other is functional components, such as in this case, the app is a functional component. The main thing that a component does is that it returns a JSX, and the JSX is something that defines the UI of the component. In case the component is functional, but if the component is class-based, then the component implements a render function that returns the JSX. JSX stands for JavaScript XML, and the syntax of JSX is similar to HTML tags, where each tag represents a component. So a component can be composed of many other components, such as in this case, the app is a complex component that is composed of many subcomponents, such as a safe area view and the scroll view, the header, and all other components that we see inside this JSX. Or a component can be a simple component that just returns a text from React Native. For example, let's just remove everything and just return a text. Now let's create two child components of the app component, and we will make one child component as a functional component and the other one as a class-based component, so that we can see and compare the differences between the two types of components. So let's create the child component 1. Now let's import the child component 1 in the app. We need to import React from React for every component. Let's add some text to this component so that we can see. Let's give this component some style using the style prop. And the style prop takes an object. with some fields that we would like to use to reflect the custom style of our component. In this case, let's just give it a background color. Styling a React Native component is similar to the way styling is done in CSS, except that the properties in React Native are camel case. Now this is one way of styling a React Native component. The other way of styling the component you have already seen in the app.js, that is stylesheet.create. And this is the way React Native recommends styling your component because, as per the documentation, this is a more efficient way of styling your React Native component. Now let's create child component 2, and this time we will make a class-based component. Now let's import this component into app.js. Let's style this component too. As you can already see the differences between the two components. A class-based component extends the component from React, and this component implements a function render that returns the JSX. Now let's talk about the other difference, and that is the way state is managed internally between the two components. In a class-based component, the component has a field, state, that you can initialize in the constructor and then use this state field throughout the lifecycle of the component, as well as in the render function. So let's use the state to dynamically style the component. Let's import a button. And when we press the button, we are going to change the color of the component by updating the state. To update the state, we use the function setState, and the reason we use this function is that it causes the component to re-render the moment this function is called. Let's define an array of colors that we can use to get random colors from. As you can see, it is randomly picking the color from the colors of the state and then updating the background with the color. The reason why we used inline styling, even though I said that the React Native recommends styling your component the way it is done in app.js like this using stylesheet.create, is that this way we can style a component dynamically. But for the part that is not dynamic, such as the flex one, we still can use the stylesheet.create like this. Let's copy and paste. And then we can remove this. But instead of the style object, we will pass an array of style objects. We need to import style sheet. Let's give it some more styles. So that's about the state and the style in a class-based component. Now let's see what we can do about the state in functional component. We can manage the state in a functional component using hooks. So let's do the same thing that we did in child component 2. Let's copy and paste the styles. Let's define background color using hooks. Let's copy the button. But instead of this.setState, we will call this set background color. And we also need to define the colors. We forgot to import style sheet. As well as a button. So now you know how state is managed in functional component compared to the class-based component. Before the introduction of hooks, managing state in functional component was not possible. So usually class-based components were used in React Native. After the introduction of hooks, we always create functional components instead of the class-based components. And the reason is that this makes the code much more compact. Now let's talk about props. So the props are the fields of component that are passed from the parent component to the child component. So in this case, let's pass the background color from the parent component to the child component. And this is going to be for child component 1. Now that we are using the props to the child components, let's use these props in each of these components to initialize the state. So the way we access props in the functional component is like this. Now that we are passing the background color, we will have to change the name of this variable so that it does not conflict with the props that is passed. As you can see now, the initial color of the component is the one that was passed as prop. Now let's access the prop in a class-based component. As you can see, the initial color of the background is white. Let's change the value of these props. From the next video, we will be building this app. You can download this app from the Google Play. The link is given in the description. But before we start building this app, let's talk about some of the terms and see what they refers to. So in a game, we can have 2 or more players. A player can either be a red player, or a yellow player, or a green, or blue. Each player has 4 pieces, denoted by the name 1, 2, 3, 4. Some of the components that we will be creating, such as this, is a player box. And these are cell boxes. Each cell box has a position, and we will discuss more about this when we start developing these components. The reason I chose Ludo game for this course is that I thought practicing the concept of states, props, and components could be done well through this. And that's it for today's video, and I'll see you in the next video.